All right, we ready? Let's get on with negotiation skills. All right, for your planning purposes, why don't you figure somewhere in the neighborhood of about an hour and 10 minutes for this class tonight. And again, as usual, if you have any questions, stop me. This is for you, okay? It's for you. There are no foolish questions. The only foolish questions are questions that you don't ask. I'm going to keep a couple of these in the back. Okay, here we go. Negotiation skills. As we all know, this is so important, but I want you all to bear in mind one important thing, that a lot of negotiation takes place well before your buyer's getting ready to make an offer or when it's extended to the seller. And that's the key thing that I want you to remember tonight before we get into the materials, okay? But let's talk in general terms first about why do buyers want to negotiate. Now, there's some cultures, as we all know, where negotiation is a basic part of the day-to-day life. So cultural reasons are a major reason why some people feel compelled to negotiate. A lot of realtors that I've met feel a little bit uneasy or uncomfortable when someone wants to negotiate. It is just a normal thing to happen. So sometimes it's just cultural reasons. Buyers today truly believe that they've got the world in their hands when it comes to real estate, and that it's a true buyer's market. What we want to remember is that you have to talk to buyers before you get out and start working with them. What's one of the things that you want to make sure that you convey to a buyer when you start working with a buyer relative to the market and setting appropriate expectations? They need to be mortgage approved if they're serious about being in the marketplace. Okay, that's one thing. What's another thing about relative to setting expectations with buyers in today's market?
That the market has already come down and balanced out the price.
Very good, very good. Buyers today get a lot of their information from online and newspapers about the housing bust, blah, 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 blah. Does everybody realize that in the New York metropolitan area, this is one of the fewer areas in the country that haven't been impacted as great as other areas around the country? Out of the 50 states in the United States, one being the state that was hit the worst with foreclosures, defaults, loss of property values, etc., and 50 being the state that has lost the least value, where do you think New York fits? One being the worst, 50 being absolute, almost untouched. 43rd. 43rd. So New York, and let's face it, the New York metropolitan area really represents the bulk of the New York housing market. So New York has been impacted to a less significant degree. You have to make sure that these buyers know that the market has come down, sellers are being more realistic, and the most important thing that you want to remember to tell buyers is that desirable, well-priced properties, what happens to desirable, well-priced properties? They sell right away. So buyers can't waste time. Remember that, okay? That's going to be a question on the test. Okay. Another reason why buyers want to negotiate is because they've seen a like-in-kind property that offered a better price-value relationship. Remember, we always talk about people don't buy on price. People do not buy on price. They buy the most they can get at the best price. They buy on a price-value relationship. Remember that. And likewise, as I've said a number of times in the listing classes and in the seller classes, you never want to tell a seller that their property is overpriced. Never. Even when you have the listing, especially when you're at the listing table, but when you have the listing, you never want to tell the seller that their home is overpriced or their property is overpriced. It's like telling them they've got an ugly baby. Okay? What do you want to tell the seller? Say it? Okay, someone whispered it back there, at least one person was listening. You always want to express to the seller that buyers are not seeing the price-value relationship. Well, no, you want to tell your seller that the buyers are not seeing the price-value relationship. Okay? All right. buyers today, obviously they want to negotiate because they want to get the best price possible, and that makes all the sense in the world. And sometimes buyers want to negotiate because they can't afford the asking price. Okay? Those are reasons why buyers want to negotiate. Okay, let's go to the back of this page, which is negotiating rules of the road. All right, remember, as a realtor, we've got to gain the respect of all properties involved, of all parties involved in negotiations. And we do that with simple courtesy and integrity. Honesty, promptness in returning phone calls, responsiveness to getting things done that you promised to do, professionalism, promptness for meetings, promptness for showings. These are all things that you can do to show respect and gain the trust of both buyers and sellers in negotiation. Never talk about one party to another. Okay? Now, I hear realtors do this all the time. You're working with a buyer, and the seller's unresponsive, and I hear the realtor tell the buyer that they're working with, the seller, his mind's in another place. Never talk negatively about a seller when you're working with a buyer, or when you're working with a seller about the buyer. It only damages whatever relationship and bridge that you want to build. Never talk negatively about the other party. It's a cardinal rule in negotiation. Always operate from a position of strength. Always operate from a position of strength. Obviously, if your buyer is putting down 40%, you want to use that fact over and over again, especially in today's financing environment where everyone in this room knows how difficult it is for a buyer to obtain financing. If it's your listing and the seller's property was listed only 30 days ago, that's operating from a position of strength to get the best offer because the property is still fresh and new on the market, and not all the buyers out there have seen it. So the seller is in a much better position to be able to leverage what's going on in the marketplace based upon the fact that the property is brand new on the market. And clearly you can say that the seller's in really no hurry because his property was just listed 30 days ago. Never negotiate against yourself. I hear this happen quite often with realtors as well. Buyers often will ask you, well, what price do you think the seller will take? For you to offer anything up except for, well, let's make an offer and find out, you're misguided. Because if you ever offer up a number, who owns that number? You do. You own that number.
You said them.
That's right. That's right. Okay? So remember, whenever a buyer says to you, well, what do you think I should offer? What do you think the seller will take?
Full price.
Always say, well, you can say full price, yes, you can say that, but the whole idea would be to encourage an offer and say, let's make an offer and find out, okay? All right, and by the way, you've heard me say this many, many times. When you show a buyer a property, you should know what the market value of that property is, okay? You should know what the listing price is. I mean, that's obvious. You know what the ask is, but you should always know what the market value price of that property is. So when the buyer makes an offer that's ridiculously low, you can reflect upon what the market value is and what the market's saying, and encourage them to be a little bit more realistic. Okay? You want to be able to shape results with expectations. We've talked about this a bunch of times in different contexts, but you want to become an expert with market talk for both buyers and sellers. And market talk is effectively, there's some materials right here. Market talk is effectively saying things to buyers and saying things to sellers early on in your relationship with them that helps shape their expectations. With a buyer, you want to try to create some urgency in today's market. With a seller, you want to be able to create some reality about what's going on in the marketplace with buyers. Okay? So always shape results with expectations. And I'll give you a simple example. Most of us have children. If you don't shape expectations with your children, they run them up. you don't set appropriate expectations in personal relationships, they go bad. You need to set appropriate expectations with buyers early on in your relationship with them and with sellers before you take their listing. If you don't, things go downhill. They go downhill.
Les,
Yes?
you said with sellers you want to create urgency, and with buyers you want to create...
You want to create urgency as well. Okay? And let me give you an example. With buyers today, what's one thing that you can say or you can share with a buyer that should create urgency for them to move ahead right now?
The interest rates
It's
will
a way-
Right.
More house with the interest rate now.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent. Let me just repeat that for everybody. With a buyer, you want to point out that mortgage rates are still very, very attractive. However, they've been creeping up. They've been creeping up. And just to reinforce something I said a couple of weeks ago, what's one of the main reasons why mortgage rates are starting to creep up, interest rates in general? Fear of inflation. In the history of monetary policy here in the United States, whenever the federal government sees inflation, historically they've always somehow initiated rates to creep up. It's a hedge against inflation. What's causing inflation right now? Gasoline prices. Very good. Very good. And we're going to see that happen. And as a result of gasoline prices, what else has gone up? The cost of everything being shipped from point A to point B. Okay, so you want to create urgency with a buyer by saying rates are still attractive, but they're starting to creep up. And if they creep up, you're not going to get as much home for your money. Okay? With a seller, you can say the same thing. That if you wait to get your property on the market right now, we're starting to see mortgage rates creep up. And when mortgage rates creep up, buyers drop out of the market and your property becomes less affordable. So let's get your property on the market now. Let's not wait. Yes?
Also, you could tell them that we're expecting a new wave of foreclosures to hit the market.
Many experts feel that there could be more foreclosures and defaults, which will add more inventory and lower price inventory to the market. So let's get your property on the market now. Great point, Debbie. Okay? Yes? All right. Shape results with expectations. Okay? Always prepare buyers and sellers for the worst case. Now, all these things, now, I just want you to think about this, and this is what I tried to reflect upon at the beginning. All of these things that we've talked about so far are very relative to negotiation. A lot of us think negotiation is only when an offer is presented. You've got to do a lot of work ahead of time so that you prepare your buyers and sellers for negotiation. You're almost negotiating with them before negotiation begins. Always prepare the sellers and buyers for the worst case. Okay? When a buyer makes a low-ball offer on a property, many realtors will just take that offer, so excited to get it, and run with it. Wrong. It's the wrong thing for you to do. It's the wrong thing for you to do. What your goal should be is to try to negotiate that price up with the buyer before you take it in, by logic and rationale and good sense. Now here's an example, okay? When a buyer's intent upon making a low-ball offer, before you take it to the listing agent or seller, you've got to let that buyer know that there's a very low, because they want to, the asking price is $400, they want to offer $310, and you know, from knowing the market value of the property, the market value is around $360, $370. So you've got to share that information. And you've got to let that buyer know that the probability of that offer being accepted is you know, probably low. So it's my responsibility, it's my obligation to take that offer in to the seller, but with the reality that the probability is going to be very low, that it's going to be accepted, you should be thinking about a counter or another offer when this is rejected. So you're setting expectations, and you're preparing them for the worst case.
Don't they kind of feel that you're setting them up?
Sorry.
No, you know, the reality is, if you take an offer in, if a buyer wants to make a low-ball offer on a property, and you say, great, let me take that offer in, what is that buyer thinking?
It's a good offer.
It's going to be accepted. So it's just the contrary. You want to set appropriate expectations. Yes? Hey guys, you guys just walked in. There's materials right up front here, okay? Okay. And the sign-in sheet's in the back. Where's that sign-in sheet, by the way? It's right there? Okay. Make sure that everybody signs in. Okay, you're not going to get credit for this class. Okay. on the second bullet point about always preparing the buyers and sellers for the worst case, when a seller is intent upon listing their property at a much higher price than market, and you decide to take the listing anyway, and I'll say this, there are reasons for all of you to take a listing at a higher than market price, as long as it's not ridiculously high, and as long as the seller, you set appropriate expectations with the seller beforehand. But you've got to point out to the seller very clearly, as we talked about in presenting comps, that buyers are very savvy today. Buyers know the market. They know when a property's been on the market for a while. They know when a property is stale. They know when a property's priced right. And if a property is overpriced, the buyers won't even visit the property. Now, if you make that very, very clear at the listing table, and 2 months down the road, after you had the listing, the seller is all over you wondering how come there's no buyer appointments, you can reflect upon the things that you told him or her at the listing table about what happens when there's an overpriced listing. Setting expectations at the listing table is absolutely critical, and it helps prepare the seller in that scenario for the worst case. All right? Be aware of the power of timing. When a buyer makes an unrealistic offer on a property that's rejected, and then several weeks wants to go back to it, and that property's gone off the market, or there's an offer on it, that is the best scenario to drive home a point in that buyer's mind. That if you make low offers on a property that is desirable, it's going to be scooped up from out from underneath you, and that desirable properties don't last, and from that point on, I guarantee you that that buyer is going to make more realistic offers because they got burned. So it's very, very important when you have a buyer that's looked at a property and that property is gone the next week, even if they don't make an offer on it, that you let that buyer know. That's a great way to create urgency and to help them in their mind be more realistic, and in an effort for you to help negotiate that price up even before they made the offer. Everybody with me on that point?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. We're to page number 2. Try to discern negotiating leverage. Okay? Sellers who have just listed typically will be less willing to negotiate. Sellers who have just listed their property will be less willing to negotiate. Why is that? Anthony?
They feel their house is in demand and they're seeing a lot of activity, so.
Well, let's wait it out. Let's wait to see. Let's wait for the offer. Yes.
They want the highest price they can get.
They want the highest price, and they're willing to wait because their property is still fresh on the market. Buyers who are all cash or have large down payments are more attractive to sellers, especially in today's environment. And if you've got a buyer who's all cash or who's putting down a large initial investment, a large down payment, you've got to use that to your advantage with leverage when an offer is being made. You've got to tout that very, very clearly. Okay? Sellers who have urgency to sell because they got to get out of their property because they're being foreclosed upon, or they've got another property they're buying, or buyers who have got to make a move, they obviously have more urgency. So there's negotiating leverage. So if you can find out those bits and pieces, you're in good shape. Validate value with buyers. Now, we have a course coming up on building value with buyers that I trust you'll all come to, but it's so important. And some of you have heard me say this that have come to the non-Fillmore Pro classes. Most realtors do not sell properties. They merely show them. They don't sell. They show. All of these real estate programs that you see on TV, you know, $1 million properties and, you know, these on cable TV, they're some of the worst realtors I've ever seen in my life. They walk people into a room and they go, "Isn't it lovely? It's beautiful. Look at that wall." You know, that's showing. That's not selling. And we'll drill down on this point. But remember one thing: whether you're selling shoes, diamond rings, airplanes, or real estate, there's only one way to sell. Find out what your buyer's needs, wants, and hot buttons are, and then when you get them to the property, not only point out that feature that they were looking for, but reinforce the benefit of that feature, get them emotionally involved, and then ask a tie-down question to reinforce it. Okay? Feature, benefit, emotion, tie-down question. Feature, benefit, emotion, tie-down question. Feature, benefit, emotion, and tie-down question. Let me just give you an example to drive this point home. Okay? Feature, benefit, emotion, tie-down question. Yes? A tie-down question is a question that you'll ask that will gain the buyer's buy-in, gain the buyer's acceptance. I'll give you an example. Here we are. This is a family room. We're in a family room now, and I'm showing the buyer the property. The buyer has expressed to me well ahead of time that they do a lot of entertaining, and I point out the fact that, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, this particular family room here in this property is 18 by 24. There is ample closet room. It's an open space, so you can really fit your furniture in any way that you chose to. There's ample windows, ample light, and can you envision yourselves having an event here around the holidays, having the family over, entertaining, and using this space to really, really enjoy your family? Isn't that nice? Did you think this would work for you? That's feature, benefit, emotion, tie-down question. They told me early on that they wanted a big family room. I pointed out the features and the benefits, and then I painted a picture for them on how they can enjoy the space. Now, there's much better examples than that, but when we have this class on building value, you'll get a real good sense. Okay? Knowing comparables is essential. You know, this is a lost art, and I don't know what happened. Most realtors, when they go to visit a seller on a listing presentation, they run comps, right? Of course they run comps. We all know that. But very few realtors actually go out and physically visit the comps that are available to be viewed before they go to the seller's property. Now, yes, it takes a little bit more energy. It takes a little bit more time. It takes effort on your part. But it's the smartest thing you can do. Now, you're not going to be able to visit expireds, chances are. You're not going to be able to visit properties that are under contract, chances are. You're not going to be able to visit properties that are closed, but properties that are currently on the market, those comps and those for sale by owners that you should include into your comps, get out and see them. Because there's nothing more compelling than when you're sitting there with the seller, reviewing the comps, and the seller's giving you pushback about the pricing, for you to say, I was in this property, Mr. Reinhold, and this particular property did have a finished basement with a bathroom in the basement, and that's one of the things that adds value to this property as opposed to yours. For you to say you were in the property, you visited that property 2 days ago, you visited that property 4 days ago, what does that do in the seller's mind?
This girl really knows something.
This girl knows her business. This guy went out and went the extra yard. Because most realtors just pull comps. They don't visit them. So get out and visit the comps. Okay. Stop nibbling in its tracks. Nibbling. Nibbling is a term in negotiation that means after there's an offer and acceptance and the transaction has effectively been carved, that one party comes back and wants to get a little bit more. And there's nobody that's more guilty of this than attorneys. Attorneys, okay? Because attorneys feel as though they got to earn their money for the buyer or earn their money for the seller. And oftentimes they'll nibble on terms and conditions. Oftentimes. You've got to do your darndest to try to stop the nibbling in the tracks. And you do that if you're working with a buyer and there was a relatively tough negotiation. After there's an offer and an acceptance, you've got to go to the buyer right away and say, congratulations, we got the property for you. I know you're excited. Talk to them a little bit about the nervous excitement they're going to feel, but then have the presence of mind to say to the buyer, now listen, the seller, we really pushed the seller against the wall to get the property at the price that you wanted. And I just want to go ahead. We don't want to push the seller anymore. Make sure that, I know you're using your uncle who's an attorney, make sure that your uncle doesn't do anything to kill the deal, because the seller is very sensitive at this point in time. Just to plant that seed, because that's where a lot of nibbling happens. Okay, everybody with me? Everybody understand that? All right. Keep the dialogue going. Right? Many deals fall apart because of bruised egos of the seller receiving a low offer or the buyer having an offer kicked back. Okay? We are the middlemen and middle women. We're the ones that need to keep the ball up in the air. You know, we're brokering the deal, hence the name real estate broker. And we have to try to insulate our clients from the natural emotion that's involved here. Because buying a property or selling a property is filled with emotion, okay? Always encourage counteroffers to keep the ball up in the air. Always encourage keeping the dialogue going. And only good things can happen if you do. All right? Okay. We're on page number 3. Page number 3. Getting the buyer's mindset right for negotiation. We talked about this a little bit before. Preparation for a lowball offer begins well before the buyers make them. And we're talking about market talk, we're talking about setting expectations. As soon as you start working with a buyer today, and you know, this is a crime. I'll tell you a crime that I actually witnessed. As most of you know, I do consulting work for a number of realty companies, none in this market area, but I was in central New Jersey yesterday with a RE/MAX owner who owns 5 RE/MAX franchises, doing some sales consulting, and he had asked me, you know, he had a concern. He said, I just don't think that my realtors really know how to sell. I just get that feeling. Could you just listen in on some conversations? And I said, well, how can I do that? He has this situation in his office. It's called a splitter. Anybody know what splitters are?
Yeah.
Splitters are when someone in an office, the owner or the boss, can hit a button and listen in on anybody else's telephone call on any desk in the office. And he's the owner. He pays for the advertising. It's, you know, he makes that choice. He lets everybody know that he has that capability when people join the company. So he said, why don't you sit in my office and just listen to some phone calls. So the very first phone call I listened in on, a telephone call came in relative to a listing on the property out of that office, and the agent picks up the phone, she starts talking, and in the first 30 seconds, I'm not kidding, in the first 30 seconds, she said to the buyer, you're very smart for being in the marketplace now, because it's a real buyer's market. Now, when you tell a buyer that it's a buyer's market, what are they going to do? They're going to take their time, and they're going to think they got it, right? Then, she said within, I don't know what prompted, she said, and sellers are very negotiable today. Now, that means that every time that buyer makes an offer, it's going to be a lowball offer. And in the next 15 seconds, she said, and there's so much inventory out there today, and know what's that buyer going to want to do? See it all! Okay, and now, I hate to say this, but our counterparts in this industry, most of them are hurting us by this kind of talk. So I want all of you to please promise me that you'll talk market talk to buyers and sellers today. The right kind of market talk. And market talk to me means that you're going to do your darndest to create urgency for buyers to buy and for sellers to list now and to list at realistic prices. Okay? It's called market talk. So with a buyer, which is what we're talking about now on page 3, and for anybody that's just come in, the materials are up here, so you come on up and grab them. We're on page 3. It starts with market talk. And one thing to say, and we're looking at the first bullet point here on page 3, that sellers today, as Richard has said before, sellers today have had a reality check. And most sellers today have priced their properties to what the market is bearing. And you've got to say that in a casual conversation to a buyer. Because sometimes buyers think that every seller's property is overpriced. Point out the fact that many sellers today are past the sticker shock, and if they have a good realtor, they price their properties realistic to where the market is. Point out the fact that well-priced, desirable properties do not stay on the market long. And again, just to reiterate, and you know, folks, you're going to hear me review and reiterate and reinforce every time we get together. I know you've heard me say these things, but the more you hear it, the more it's going to become comfortable with you and muscle memory. That's the way it works. Mortgage rates are still very attractive as they've been in 35, 40 years, but they're starting to inch up. So don't take a lot of time while being in the marketplace now looking for a property, or else you're not going to get as much home for your money, as much property for your money as you might get. Okay? Point number 2, you've got to do your homework before showing the property to the buyer. And I said this before, yes, you're going to know what the asking price is, but before you ever show a property to any buyer, you must have a good working knowledge of what the market value of that property is. And sometimes there's a major difference between the asking price and what the market value is. And here's why, it's very simple. You're out there with a buyer, and the property is listed for $400, and the buyer wants to make a lowball offer and at a $320, a $310, and the market value, the asking price is $400, the market value is $380, and they want to make an offer of $320. You're doing that buyer an injustice unless you let them know what the market value is. Okay? So make sure you know the market value. And how do you, as working with a buyer, how do you find out what the market value of a property is? Run comps. Run comps. And you know, not for nothing, but for a new agent, it's one of the best ways to get to really know where the market is, by running comps when you're working with buyers, not just running comps before you go on a listing appointment. Okay? Question?
What if it really is only worth $320?
Well, then it is what it is. Then you want to encourage an offer. You know, then there's no reason to beat that buyer down, because that's where the market is. I mean, that's where the market is. Yes?
If a buyer's price is unrealistic for what he wants, can you not show him? Can you say, it's no way I'm going to...
Say that again.
If he wants to spend $350, but what he wants is a $500,000 house.
That's a great question. This is a great question. Now, some of you have heard me talk about this before. That's a great question. And this is a mistake, a little bit out of context in today's class, but it's so important. I'm going to rifle this point home. I've heard realtors come up to me saying, Les, I've shown this buyer 35 properties. As soon as I hear someone say 20, 25 properties, I know that that realtor is doing one thing horribly wrong. What they're doing is they're showing that buyer price-to-price requirements. You always must remember to show requirement to requirement. Here's what I mean. Many buyers have champagne taste and a beer budget. They've got champagne taste and a beer budget. Champagne taste and a beer budget, okay? They are mortgage approved for $500,000, and they want to live in an area where they can get A, B, C, D, E, F, G in that property. And you know in your heart of hearts that they're never going to be able to get everything they want in this neighborhood for $500,000. The worst thing you can ever do as a realtor, the worst thing you can ever do on the phone is to say to the buyer, you know, you're being a little bit unrealistic with that price, because you're never going to be able to find what you're looking for in that area that you're looking for $500,000. Wrong. As soon as you say that to the buyer, what does the buyer do? They turn off and they switch and they go to another agent. First thing they do. This is going to take a little bit of time, but here's what you must do. Let's say that they're mortgage approved for $500,000, but you know what they're looking for in the area they're looking, they're only going to get for $600,000. You've got to gun it up and waste a little bit of time and take them to those $600,000 properties. Take them to 2 of them. Don't tell them what the price is. Take them to the properties.
They ask before
To just say, it's a special surprise for you. It's a special surprise for you. Let's go. Take them to those properties that are $600,000, because the only way that they're going to believe that what they want is $100,000 over their budget is to see it firsthand. They've got to see it firsthand. Your words aren't going to do it. They've got to see it firsthand. And then take them to properties that are $450. Before a buyer pulls the trigger, they've got to see the entire spectrum of what's on the market. They're mortgage approved for $500. You got to show them properties at $450, and you got to show them properties at $600, so they have a good perspective of what their money gets them in today's market. Unless you give them that perspective in the first 10 homes you show them, first 10 properties, they're going to want to see more and 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 more. But never tell them that over the phone. You've got to show them. You've got to show them. It's the only way to do it. Everybody comfortable with that? Okay. As I said before, having working knowledge of where the market is puts you in control of low offer situations. Okay? Now, we're in the middle of page 3. Having this working knowledge puts you in control of a low offer situation. So when a buyer makes a low ball offer, your first reaction should be excitement and encouragement. What you see here in italics is a role play. Let me just read it out for you. Great. I know you love that property, and it's a great fit for you and your family. And I'm glad you're serious enough about this particular property to make an offer. But let me ask you, how did you arrive at that number? Whenever a buyer makes a lowball offer, you must ask them, how did you, great, I'm excited for you, I'm pumped, it's a great fit, but how did you arrive at that number? You must ask them how they got to that number.
My friends bought a house identical to that and blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
And when did they buy that house identical to that house?
Recently.
Yeah, then you have the comps. I'm telling you right now, you answered your own question, okay? I just told you 5 minutes ago, always know the market value before you go out. And if the neighbor bought that house recently, you know what the market value is, right?
Right.
If you didn't do that, then you okay? I answered that question 5 minutes ago, okay? So how did you arrive at that offer? Then share them the research referenced before your knowledge of like and kind properties with the market value, okay? Now most buyers will say, well, I still want to make that lowball offer. I still want to make that offer. Now we all know that it's our fiduciary responsibility in the state law to convey all offers, right? And we're going to convey the offer, but if you're smart, you're still going to want to drill down and get under the hood a little bit. Always. Don't just run and take that lowball offer because you're going to look like a fool.
Must you take it in writing or in...
Right?
Typically. Now listen, many buyers will say, I still want to make that offer. At that point, at the point when that buyer wants to make the lowball offer, you've got to offer up the risks of making a lowball offer. Okay? Now, I want you to think about something. When we talked about the listing presentation and presenting comps, what do you think about this? Before you go ahead and present the comps, think back now. This is a test for you. Not about tonight, about the presentation of comps, one of the other classes. Before you ever present your comps, what must you do with the seller before you present the comps?
You must warn them about the comps, that this is not you, this is not your numbers, it's the
Right.
house numbers.
You want to remind the seller that they're not your numbers, that they're the market's numbers, but you also always want to remind the seller about the risks of overpricing, the risks of overpricing. Likewise, when a buyer wants to make a lowball offer, you've got to remind the buyer about the risks of making a lowball offer. Okay? And here are some of the risks. And you know what these risks are. If you make a lowball offer, Mrs. Johnson, the seller's going to think that you're not serious and may not even extend a counteroffer. Sellers can also be insulted and offended and not want to deal with you. And you know, frankly, I know you may not care about this, but the listing agent who I'm going to be taking this offer to is going to think less of me because I didn't prepare you for what the market is bearing for this type of property. And what this also does, it wastes time and allows other buyers who may want to take advantage of this desirable property. So when you're own style in your own way, you need to warn the buyer about the risks of making a low-ball offer.
This
Now,
is why I asked, sorry, but this is why I asked the question just now. If a buyer offers a really unreasonable offer for the price that the property is listed at, and you know that, I mean, you're going to look like an idiot taking that to the
Listing
other
agent.
rate, the listing agent. Should you still go through all the paperwork?
I mean, there's not a lot of paperwork. It's an offer to purchase. It's not a
Go
lot.
and just take it in.
You know, it's a professional thing to do. Now, I would always, frankly, myself, I would always, when I speak to the listing agent, I would let the listing agent know that, you know, I did my darnest to prepare my buyer, prepare them with what the market is bearing, but notwithstanding that, here's the offer that they want, that they're inclined to make. Okay, so you're like kind of like covering yourself,
Yeah.
if you will. But remember, you can't just take, the whole point of this exercise is that you can't just take a low ball offer in. You've got to make an effort to try to negotiate that price up from your buyer before you even take it in. That's the whole point. Question?
I understand your point with that, but a lot of agents, particularly new ones, be afraid of confrontation with that buyer.
Correct.
Fear of losing that buyer.
Correct.
By
Correct.
saying
And-
that your offer's too low.
You-
I mean, you're not going to say that, but I know what you're saying.
Right. 100% right. Did everybody hear what he said?
No.
Okay. He said that a lot of new agents are afraid of that confrontation with the buyer by effectively telling them that their offer was too low. That's why I encourage new agents to come to this class.
Yeah, well,
Because
that's old
there's
agents
two
too.
things to do, okay? There's two things to do in life and in selling. There's two things to do. The right things and the wrong things. Okay? And you know, I'm not a rocket scientist, but these are the right things to do. Now you're going to do them in your own style and in your own way. Not in my way, not in my words, but in your style and your way. But if you don't do them, there's a lower probability of success. Right? That's the way this world we live in works. It's a sales is highly probable. You know, there's a lot of probability. And you've heard me say this, and this is the simplest analogy there is. You can choose not to do these things, or you can choose to do them. And let me give you a lucid example. There's the basketball net right there. Here's the ball. If you don't take the ball and shoot it, there is zero probability the ball is going to go through the net. No chance. Right?
Right.
If you shoot it, you may miss, but at least you tried. So at the risk of offending my buyer by warning them about the risk of overpricing, I'm only being a professional and trying to guide them. Because what I said here is right. The seller could get pissed off and not want to deal with them. And could harbor some anxiety. Yes?
But sometimes if the house is priced too high, and we need to prove to the homeowner that she's not going to get what she's asking for.
Now hang on.
We need the low offers to show how it's.
Now, are you a listing agent now?
Okay.
Yes. We're talking about buyers. Okay, we're talking about representing buyers. You're 100% right.
Yeah, but we're talking about the offers coming in, the low offers.
Right, but we're talking about page 3, getting the buyer's mindset right for negotiation. Now, if you're representing the seller, you are 100% right. The best way to validate the fact that your comps were right that you presented back 3 months ago is by having low offers come in all around the same. You're 100% right. 100% right. 100% right. Now, if you're the listing agent and I'm the agent who's working with the buyer, you know, you're going to want to see any and all offers come in. But my goal here is to try to make some money, so I want to get an offer as close to what the ask is. But you are 100% right. If you're working with the seller, you want to get low offers. You want to get any kind of offers in that validates that their price is too high. 100% right. Okay, everybody with me on that? Okay, here we go. So now, we're at the last bullet on page 3. If they still want to proceed with the offer, you've got to first rationalize with them and prepare them for the probable outcome of their lower offer, as we said earlier, okay? Now, Mrs. Johnson, it's my responsibility as a realtor to extend all offers, and I'm going to gladly extend yours, even though we chatted through what we just chatted through. But let me ask you this question. Do you love the property? Do you love the home? And if they say, yes, I do, then rationalize and say, well, then why don't we make a realistic offer so you can get it? Do you really love the property, or are you just making an offer on it? If you love the property, let's be realistic. Now, I would have gone through all that exercise and then come down to emotion. Follow me? This is selling. This is selling. And, yes?
What do you think is a realistic offer?
You know, that's a relative thing, but I think a realistic offer is somewhere in that 10% range of what the market is bearing.
I'm the buyer.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. So you're role playing. Okay? Here's this guy here. I like this guy. I like this guy. All right. So here's the question he asked. The buyer says to you, I want to make an offer on a property. What do you think is a realistic offer? What I would do is I would say, well, the asking price is $400,000, and the market is calling for somewhere around $375,000 and $380,000 because I researched it before I ever showed the property. And I would say, so your offer should be somewhere in that range. If I pointed out a number, who owns that number? I do. And if the offer's not accepted, who's the finger being pointed at? Me. So always give the range, the market range, to the ask range. Right. Y58. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And they tried to get out of me what I would list it as, and I mean, what I would offer it as, and I wouldn't tell them, I'd say just put in your best offer, but they kind of lowballed it at $490.
Yeah.
And then, you know,
Yeah. Well, see, we just talked about this tonight, but remember this. Let me reinforce this again. The buyer, the ask is $500. The market is $465, $470. The buyer says, if you were me, what would you offer? Give the range. Well, the market is between $375 and $380. The ask is $500. Your offer should be somewhere in that range, I would suggest. But that's your decision. Never give a number. Give the range.
But there is a danger. The bank, if the offer is more than the market value, there is the bank may not approve the loan.
May not appraise. So that's the risk. That's the risk. But at least you gave what the market value is. Now, if you can substantiate comps, someone in one of the classes came to me. Actually, it was Gus. Gus came to me the other day. Gus had an offer and an acceptance on a property. It was like an $800,000 property, and the appraiser came in and appraised the property at like $675, $670, and Gus was so bummed out. And I said, Gus, don't you have comps? And Gus says, yeah, I have comps that are over 800, between $750 and $850. I said, why don't you call up the appraiser and offer to send him the comps that you have? Because appraisers, generally speaking, are lazy. They're lazy, and maybe not lazy, but they get paid per job, and they do just the bare amount. Gus went ahead and brought the comps to the appraiser's office, and he moved up the appraisal. Wow. Just because the agent made that extra step. So if you can have it, Anthony.
Les, a lot of times too, through my experience, is the appraisers appraising certain neighborhoods from out of the neighborhood.
Great point.
And that they don't know the area, so that's what I would do as well.
And if an agent can help them out, they're more than willing, because effectively you're doing work for them, right?
I'm not doing like that.
Question.
I sold a condo.
They do the appraisal from the field. If the price is not accepted, if it's not a first time,
second time, I just got the situation. They do an appraisal from the field later, if it's a different.
Say it again.
Okay. He said the people sometimes, the appraisal, they're not going to the property to do an appraisal from outside.
Just outside the home, you mean?
Yes.
Not in the property.
Yeah, this is what I understand, right?
No. He doesn't live in the neighborhood.
So let's say a Brooklyn property, somebody comes from Long Island.
Let Anthony's a very experienced realtor. He's
But
one
they're
of the-
searching the location anyway, they can do like that. That's what's supposed to be based on something.
I'm not sure if I understand.
No, she doesn't understand what I
I'm not sure if
said.
there's a disconnect here. Anthony, why don't you say it again?
Sure, let's say hypothetically in Brooklyn, in Marine Park, you might get an appraiser, a bank might order an appraisal from an appraiser, let's say in Long Island someplace, that doesn't know the area. What I would do is I always recommend comparables to them, and 9 times out of 10 they take them, and the other 1 time out of 10 times they'll say, you know, we have enough to suffice.
Right.
But we're trying to just educate them on the
Educate
market.
them and help them,
Right.
help them. And you're right also that many appraisers only appraise from the street, and they don't actually go into the property. So if you're the agent who has the listing, be prepared to share your comp base with the appraiser.
We're selling condos, and 6 of them, and half of them sold, and the appraiser asked me to look at the condos.
Okay, here's an example where the appraiser actually asked the agent for comps. So don't have any compunctions about going ahead and doing that with the appraiser. Okay? All right. All right, let's move on to page 4. Page 4. Is it warm in here?
No. No. Not warm.
All right, here we go. Here we go. Getting the seller's mindset right for negotiation, okay? Before you get the listing, the seeds of future negotiation are planted. It begins with setting the listing price and building a foundation for future negotiation with buyers. And we've talked about this in some of the other classes, but at the listing table, you need to set and manage expectations with the seller. And you do it with market talk, just like you're doing with buyers, but from a different standpoint, okay? Remember, always hold off price and listing term discussions until the end at the listing table. Always share the risks of overpricing before you present comparables. Before you present the comps, always warn the seller about risks that sellers face if they choose to overprice their property. Separate yourself from the comp numbers. These numbers are not yours. The comparable numbers are not yours. They're the market's numbers. All you're doing is you're presenting the comps. If you're asked, and we just talked about this a moment ago, if you're asked about what you think their property is worth, merely present the comp range and suggest they should be in the high, middle, or low part. Let them pick the number. If you get involved in picking the number, you ultimately lose in any scenario, whether you're with a buyer or you're with a seller. If you do take an overpriced listing, and we all do, remember you always take it under one condition. Mr. Seller, I'm prepared to take your listing at the price that you've chosen, but I'll do that under one condition, and that is that you're open to reviewing and revisiting the buyer activity on your property on a weekly basis. On a weekly basis. And in that way, we know what the market's saying. And if we're not getting any buyer activity on your property, what do you think the market's saying to us, Mr. Seller?
Too high.
If you get them to say that, as soon as they say that, you say, well, there's only one way to really find out. Let's get your property on the market, get the listing paperwork, and go for the close right then and there. Okay? And remember, the only way to get a seller's price down after you have the listing is through weekly feedback. Weekly feedback. Feedback on the web activity, feedback on the telephone calls, on the page impressions, on emails, on feedback from realtors. It's the only way to get a price, to get the price down. Yes? Here we go, page 5. Okay. Presenting the offer. Now, I don't know why this is so difficult, but I see this happen very infrequently in Brooklyn. In Manhattan, it happens all the time. It happens all the time. Where, if you're working with a buyer, I hope everyone knows that when you're working with a buyer and you want to present, and your offer wants to make, and your buyer wants to make an offer, that you reserve the right as a realtor in the state of New York to present the offer directly to the seller in the presence of the listing realtor. Let me say it again. Say it again. You're working with the buyer, and your buyer wants to make an offer on a property. Here in New York, every one of us reserves the right to present that offer verbally to the seller, who's not yours, directly in the presence of the listing realtor. And you don't do it personally, you do it in a conference call. In every one of your offices, you have the ability to teleconference and telecon somebody else in. Let me say it once again to make sure everybody's with me on this. What do you mean? In Manhattan, yeah. Yeah, I worked in Manhattan for 8 years. 8 years. Well, then you know, there were realtors. You know what? It's the only way I do it. The only way I do it, because no one is ever going to convey an offer in the spirit that I can on behalf of my buyer.
That's right.
No one's going to be able to, because we know what realtors do. Now, if you don't know what realtors do, I'm going to tell you right now. I'm a sleazy listing agent. Okay, I've got a property. I got a property. Okay, and Anthony is a realtor from another company. He's got a buyer. He makes it. He tells me, Anthony, although he's real savvy, let's pretend he's a brand new guy in the business. He's not the experienced guy he is right now. Okay, new guy in the business. He conveys the offer to me, the realtor. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to bring this offer to my seller right away. I'm going to call up every buyer that I personally took to my seller's property and call every one of them up and say, hey, you know, there's an offer on the table, but I can get you in with a, you know, if you want to make a better offer. And after I run through all my buyers, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to all the realtors in my office, who have shown that property, and shop Anthony's offer around my office before I take it to my seller.
Well, that's what our office to make money, and you as the listing person got to make the money.
You're a real
That's right.
That's
all.
make your money.
That's
It's
right.
always been that way.
But it's not doing Anthony any good who's working with the buyer. Okay? Does everybody understand where I'm coming from with this?
Yes.
Question.
You say that you are working with the buyer. Is it the case where you are the buyer agent?
No, no.
You are still getting paid by the seller?
Of course. Of course.
Now,
Yes.
if the listing agent says, no way, I'm not going to allow you to do that.
Right.
I want to take it myself.
Then I'm going to say it's the law in the state of New York that I reserve the right, and you reserve the right as a realtor to convey the offer directly to your seller. Now role play with me, okay? You're the nasty listing agent. I'm the agent who has the buyer who wants to make the offer on the property. I say it's the law, sir.
The law?
It's the law. Yeah.
Where did you get it? Can you show it to me?
You know what? I got a better idea. Why don't you give me your broker's contact number and name, and I'll have my broker of record call your broker of record, and he can educate you. I don't want to educate you. That's his job. Give me his name and his number.
You're talking about education.
No, I'm talking about the law. Okay? Now, don't role play with me. I get nasty. All right? Now, let me clarify this. It is the law, and your manager will call up, your manager broker will call up his manager broker, and as soon as brokers talk, his broker's license is on the line. Not his, and they'll work it out, and ultimately it'll be conveyed with with his presence. Now, you can never convey the offer directly to your seller without you being involved in the teleconference call.
If they are both from Fillmore,
No, it doesn't make a difference.
It doesn't make a difference, but that's a little bit different. You know, at Fillmore, I'm sure that...
you may be more softer with the
Of
Fillmore
course,
and
oh
Fillmore.
yes, of course. And I'd be softer anyway, I'm just trying to demonstrate a point. Just trying to demonstrate a point.
Okay, how about this scenario?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Les, my seller is on safari and he can't be reached. I'm so sorry about it. I can't reach him, he's on safari.
Yeah, I mean, those kind of scenarios,
That happens with certain
I mean, it does happen.
I said,
I mean,
do you
what I
want
mean-
me to reach him directly for you? I got the number.
I mean,
You want me to reach him?
Go to mom, manager of the moms.
question.
I found a house, again, for those people in Bedford Heights, and
Yeah.
the house wasn't on MLS, it was on Trulia, and I called the agent to see if he would co-broke with me, and he said
Right.
yes. But I didn't know this was the law, and so when I gave him the offer, I think he's holding out because he's trying to find buyers, where he doesn't have the listing.
Well, that's what I just said. Yeah, that's what I just said. Yeah, they do this all the time, and it's one way to circumvent that. Realtors do this. Agents who list properties do this all the time, and the term is they will shop around your offer before they ever convey it. They'll shop it around to other buyers that they've worked with, and they'll go to other realtors in their office who have also showed their property. Okay, question.
But I've seen a case where they haven't even listed the address. When I called the guy, he says, we don't, I identified myself as from a broker from, an agent from Fillmore.
Yeah.
He says, we don't give addresses on the telephone.
You know, I mean,
Is there open listings?
maybe an open listing. You know, I'm not sure. Question.
That sleazy listing agent,
Yeah.
that offer that he's shopping around to try to get a better one for his commission,
Yes.
he has to convey that offer to his seller at some point, doesn't he? Or
Unless he finds another one from the one he's shopping around. Yes. Like
so he doesn't have to convey it at all?
No,
Like if he got a better offer, he can just put off,
You know,
imagine.
I'll tell you what, in some cases, there are offers that never get to sellers unless you, as the agent who's working with the buyer, forces the issue. And this is one way to force the issue. It's one way to force the issue. Now, there's one caveat here. Listen carefully. If that sleazy listing agent, at the listing table, on the listing agreement, gets the seller to sign off that all offers come through listing broker, and they have that right on the body of the listing agreement, then you're out of luck. Now,
I thought it was the law.
sometimes they're sharp and they do that. Let me say it again. Some listing agents, at the listing table, just, you know, how they just rush the seller through the paperwork, if they've got a little caveat there that says that all offers will come through the listing agent, and they fax that to you after you've tried to push the issue, then the offer is with them and can stay with them.
Question, assuming that it's an exclusive, an office exclusive with somebody who's not on the most list.
Yep.
Okay? And like she asked if they had told her,
Yep.
and then they refused to give the offer for whatever reason, or you don't know if they're giving the offer.
You wouldn't know.
Do you still have the right, because it's not on
Sure.
multiple?
Oh yeah. Oh
You
yes.
still have the right to
It's a
request
state
it.
law for any realtor in general. Great question, Dan. It's a state law, yes, definitely. It's with exclusives or with properties, or with properties in the MLS.
Some buyers usually go behind the listing agent's back and go directly to the homeowner and
Right.
let them know that they did present an offer.
Right now, and just to that point, the point was just made that sometimes buyers try to go around the horn directly. There's one simple way for all of you to avoid that from happening ever. If ever you show a buyer a property, you should always have them sign a notice of showing. It's a very simple document, a notice of showing. And all that document says is that I, Les Newlands, on March 16th, showed the property at 122 Avenue U to Jane White And that's it, and just have her sign it. And you know, sometimes buyers say, well, why am I signing this? All you say is that my manager requires knowing what I do on a day-to-day basis. And then, very importantly, after you do that, make sure that you document it in My Fillmore that you showed a property, that you put it on the dashboard. And with that evidence, and I've been through 7 or 8 of these situations personally, the people that I've managed, where it was guys please, where it was documented in the way that I just suggested, and another agent took the buyer, and the buyer went ahead and bought the property, and we went to the Department of State, and in all 7 cases, well, 5 out of the 7 cases where it was documented properly, the commission reverted back to the agent that had documented that and initially was the procuring cause. Remember this, just because you show a property to a buyer does not mean that you're the procuring cause and that you've earned a commission. It's got to be documented, and there's got to be, it's quote-unquote, an unbroken string of contact, meaning that you just can't show a property and document it in the 2 fashions we talked about. You would have had to have followed up with a voicemail message, and with an email, and maybe with another voicemail message, and another email, maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of the next 30 days. Even if you don't get anybody, but you documented, left VM for Jane White. Email, you have the documentation in the database in My Fillmore about emails, obviously. Okay? So you have to have a short, unbroken string of contact. If you do that, you're good to go.
The case, what she said, is something else. That means not only the buyer is working with her, but to go to make an offer and go to the owner and tell the owner, I'm making an offer of the bread.
That's fine. If you documented that you showed that you were the procuring cause, that you showed the buyer the property, okay, and that you had a notice of showing, and that you've made an effort to stay in touch with them, same thing, same thing. The seller will have to pay a commission to you. Okay? I mean, that's well, if there was not an unbroken string of contact, that's the key thing.
Do I have to pay for both real estates?
I think what will happen is the state will force the seller to pay you, and then the seller will probably sue. You know, I mean, I don't know how it will work, but you get your commission. Question? All right, here we go. Here we go. All right. So the jump-off point here was that only you and I, if we're working with the buyer, can we convey the offer in the spirit that we'd really like to. Because you don't know how that listing agent is going to share your buyer's offer to the seller. Okay? So here we go. Here we go. We're at the middle of the page where it says call up the listing agent. Okay? Call up the listing agent and speak with enthusiasm and confidence. Even if you're brand new, perception is everything. Talk with confidence, talk with enthusiasm. And try not to let them get a word in edgewise, but here's the role play. You know, Miss Jane, hi, this is Les Newlands from Fillmore Real Estate. I got some great news for you on your property on Cooper Street. I've got a buyer who'd like to make an offer on your property, and I'd like to let you know that my buyer's mortgage approved, and what I'd like to do is to set up a conference call between you, myself, and your seller to convey the offer. And I was thinking about 7 o'clock this evening. Do you think you could arrange that? So now that's when the listing agent will say, well, you know, I want to know what the offer is, and then or say I want to convey the offer myself. And that's when you say, well, it's a state law, as I'm sure you're well aware, that every realtor in New York reserves the right to convey an offer directly on behalf of their buyer to a seller as long as you're present. And if they give you pushback, then say, well, look, I don't want to be, you know, argumentative. Why don't you give me your broker of record's name and the contact number, and I'll have my broker of record call her or him. Now, just so you know, broker of records are very, very sensitive about their license. It's their livelihood. It's their lifeblood. Okay? So you play that card, and it works. And if they say that, I'll check the time, always a good idea to give a couple of alternative times.
The next time you're not gonna do this one.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
I can give a rat's ass.
Exactly.
I've got a buyer now who wants to make an offer. This is a state law. It's a state law. It's a state law. It's the law. I'm not asking for something that's not provided in the law books in the state of New York.
Well, we had a case, I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
We had a case in New York, we had the broker of record. The broker was out of the country.
Okay.
We had to wait a week.
The agent, he kept saying, he can't do anything until it comes back,
Okay.
and we had to buy a
He's
hanging.
calling
That's-
tomorrow,
that's a
he's
sh-
calling
that's a shame.
tomorrow.
That's a shame, but that kind of thing, that's out of your control. That's one of those things that are out of your control, okay? Now look, some of you won't have the guts to do this. That's okay. That's okay. If you're not comfortable with this, if it's not something that you can find, within yourself to do, don't do it. All I'm saying is this. Only you, if you're working with a buyer, are going to be able to convey your buyer's offer in the spirit that only you can do. Because you're going to be able to tout the buyer and do all the right things that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. Okay? Now let's assume, again, if the listing agent gives you pushback, and quite frankly, let me ask you guys this question. Let me ask you this question, sir, who raised that issue. The listing agent isn't going to want to deal with me. Why? Why?
You're absolutely right, I agree with you.
You gotta spread the commission.
And the practice, next time, let's say, there's only so many real estate.
But just answer my question. Why is he not going to want to deal with me? I'm bringing an offer to his seller.
You gotta spread the commission.
All the commission.
They want to be in control of it.
Okay, that's a reason, yes.
You're right.
That's a reason, that's a valid reason that he wants to be in control. I want to be in control too, but everybody hear me out right now. Everybody hear me out right now. How easy is it to sell properties today? Is it easy?
No.
Shouldn't every listing agent be drooling over offers?
Yes.
Well, I'll agree with you with one thing. Back 5 years ago, back 4 years ago, when it was a seller's market, not so much the case. But now, most listing agents will be more than happy to comply with this because they want to move inventory and make money. Okay? Now, they could be greedy. They may want to shop around the listing. But again, if you don't try, if you don't ask for it, you ain't going to get it. Okay? Now, let's just go through this. And then we've got 10 more minutes, and then we're out of town here. All right? Okay, so once you sort out a time, and you have a teleconference set up, there's these steps you want to take, and I urge you just to keep this in front of you and follow it, okay? So when you're all on the phone together, it's the seller, it's you, and it's the listing agent. You're the agent who's working with the buyer. Ask the listing agent to introduce yourself to the seller. Say, so her name is Jane. Jane is from Douglas Elliman. We're going to say, Jane, are you there? Great. Is your seller there, Jane? Terrific. Jane, can you introduce me to your seller? Mr. Reinstein, hi. This is Les Newlands from Philmar. How do you do, Mr. Reinstein? Now, here's something that you want to do right away. You want to ingratiate yourself to the listing agent. Now, the listing agent was mad at me for doing this. I'm going to make Jane feel great. I'm going to say, Mr. Gladstein, I just want to let you know that you should be very comforted in knowing that Jane, your listing agent, is terrific. She was very professional in setting up this teleconference call, and I really appreciate her efforts in doing so. You got someone who's working on your behalf for sure. Now, I do that for one reason. Why?
Break the barrier.
To break the barrier with Jane, who was angry at me from the beginning, and even if Jane was compliant from the beginning, now Jane is the listing agent, even if she was compliant, I want to get Jane to like me, right? Not for nothing, I want to get Jane to like me. Not that I'm going to be drinking buddies with Jane, but I want to get her to like me, okay? All right. Now I want to try to get the seller to like my buyer. This is before I'm not just going to blurt out the offer. I want to get the seller to like my buyer. And I'm going to flatter, Mrs. Reinstein by saying, Mrs. Weinstein, I want to say that before I get into the terms of the offer, that my buyer was very, very impressed by the beautiful color decor. And all, I know that the wall hangings that you have are your personal items, but my buyer just is very impressed by the great taste that you have. But I want to get the seller to like my buyer.
You're wasting my time.
Okay? I want to get the seller to like my buyer. Now I'm going to do this quickly, and you know, frankly, they don't know what I'm doing. You know what this is called? Everybody know what this is called?
Schmoozing.
It's schmoozing. It's also called salespersonship. Like it or not. Like it, this is called salespersonship. You know, selling is a learned behavior. It's a learned behavior. No one's a born salesman or a saleswoman. It's a learned behavior.
So called
Okay?
technique.
Next thing you want to do before you convey the offer is to sell your buyer's strengths to the seller. Point out the fact that your buyer is mortgage approved from a major lender. The buyer is not just mortgage qualified. My buyer is mortgage approved. And that you have the approval in hand, which you're going to fax along with a written copy of the offer right after the telephone call. That my buyer is willing to work with the terms and conditions that you've outlined. My buyer knows that you want to remain in the house for a period of time, and there's certain inclusions that you want. My buyer is prepared to work with you. Okay? Now, this happens real quickly. It's just conversational, it's light, it's airy. I'm not going to, you're not going to explain what you're doing as I'm explaining to you. Remember, if your buyer's offer is very, very low, it's an important strategy. If your buyer's offer is very low, pre-warn the seller before the offer of how your buyer arrived at the number. Okay? And here's what I mean. Here's an example. You're going to say that, before I officially convey the offer to you, I just want to let you know that my buyer recognizes that the roof needs to be replaced on your property. And some of the siding is coming off on the back of the property. And my buyer built in the cost of those elements into her offer. Okay? So you're almost pre-warning the seller of a lower offer. Okay? Last page, page 6. If your buyer's offer is reasonable, hold off on any substantiation until after there's a reaction from the seller or the realtor. So only if the offer is low do you want to pre-warn with substantiation. If the offer is close, hold off until you convey the offer and you get pushback. Okay? Now remember, after you convey an offer, zip it. Don't say a word. After you give a number, don't babble on. Don't say a word. Just give the number. Use silence as a tool. Remember, when and by the way, always have comps handy. Okay? And always encourage a counter offer. Now typically, if the realtor was halfway smart, the listing realtor, he or she would have coached the seller not to say anything. Let's get the offer, let's discuss it, and then we'll get back. So typically, after you convey the offer and you zip it, and you don't say anything, the listing realtor will say, well, thanks, Les, we'll get back to you. Let us think about it, we'll get back to you. Don't ever let that go. When they say to you, thanks, Les, we'll get back to you, you've got to put it in a box. Say, great, I appreciate that. When? When can I expect your call back? And they might say, well, we don't,
A day or two.
we don't know, a day or two.
Couple days.
Here's what you say. When they say that, you say, I appreciate that. The only reason why I ask how quickly you can get back is that my buyer was deciding to make an offer on not only your property, but another property.
Good answer.
And I'd hate to see my buyer move on just because of lack of responsiveness. Now remember, if you just said that to the listing realtor will say, get out of town. But you got the seller on the line with you. Now, what do the seller's doing right now on the line? Okay? That's one of the reasons why you want to do this directly. Okay? Yes? Yes. You good? Have a good night.